10 amazing Australian inventions the world uses daily that America takes credit for. Right now, at this exact moment, you're using at least 3 inventions that came from a small island nation, and you have absolutely no idea. You think your smartphone is American, your Wi-Fi is American, your medical devices are American. But what if I told you that the world has spent decades stealing the credit from one country that's too polite to fight back? Welcome back. Today, we're exposing 10 Australian inventions that the world uses every single day. And by the end of this, you're going to feel either angry or amazed, probably both. But wait, before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment, I subscribe below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. Before we dive in, I need to show you something. According to Griffith University's 2023 study, 67% of Australians don't even know their country invented over 200 globally used products. Meanwhile, Americans think they invented basically everything. This isn't about national pride. This is about how the world's narrative machine works. Stick around. Let's start with something so obvious you'll feel foolish for not connecting the dots. The boomerang. Yeah, that spinning stick you played with as a kid. Turns out, it's one of the most sophisticated pieces of aeronautical engineering ever created. Meet Derek. He's 67, retired teacher from Melbourne. Growing up, he threw wooden boomerangs in the outback every weekend. It was just a toy, right? Something his grandfather showed him. Nothing special. But then his grandson comes home from school in California, and his physics teacher is explaining aerodynamic disks. And she credits, I'm not making this up, American innovation. An American disc-making company apparently pioneered the concept. Derek went home that night and started researching. Here's what he found. Indigenous Australians perfected boomerang flight over 40,000 years ago. 40,000. That's 40,000 years before Newton, before calculus, before we even had a word for physics. Indigenous Australians understood gyroscopic rotation, the Coriolis effect, and Magnus force. They engineered a curved, weighted object that defies gravity through pure aerodynamic principle. In the 1970s, Australian physicist Felix Hess and Joe Walker published groundbreaking studies, proving that boomerang flight demonstrates the exact same physics principles we use today in helicopters, drones, and fighter jets. Think about that. A piece of wood that came back to you. That's precision engineering. And now, every drone manufacturer uses the same principles. Every helicopter blade rotates using the same aerodynamics the boomerang mastered millennia ago. Dynam, DJI, Parrot. They all build products on physics that Australia's indigenous people understood before written language existed. But here's the thing that kills me. Nobody gets a credit. Because America's marketing machine was louder. But wait until you hear about number 3. This one literally gave billions of people free internet. Quick stat. Wi-Fi generates $1.2 trillion annually in global productivity. One invention. One country. Watch what happens next. Margaret is 78 years old. She lives in rural Australia, in the same house she and her late husband John moved into 40 years ago. John wasn't famous. He wasn't on the news. He was a researcher at CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. He worked in the 1990s on radar technology. Boring stuff to most people, but John loved it. In 1992, John and his team filed a patent for something called direct sequence spread spectrum technology. It was a missing piece the tech world didn't know it needed. And then John died. Years later, Margaret's watching her grandchildren video call from anywhere in the house. Wi-Fi calling, Wi-Fi video, Wi-Fi everything. And she thinks John would have loved this. Then she sees an interview with Steve Jobs. And the interviewer asks, who invented wireless technology? And Steve Jobs talks about American innovation, Silicon Valley, the spirit of invention. No mention of John. No mention of CSIRO. No mention of Australia. That night, Margaret found John's old filing cabinet. There were the documents, the patent, the dates. February 1992. Her husband's name. His team's names. Margaret started crying. Not angry crying. Sad crying. The kind where you realize the world moved on and forgot someone important to you. Here's the actual science. John O'Sullivan and the CSIRO team pioneered the spread spectrum technology that became the foundation of Wi-Fi, IEEE 802.11. They didn't just make a contribution. They solved the fundamental problem that prevented wireless internet from existing at scale. By 2012, that patent was worth $430 million in licensing fees to Australia. 30 years of royalties. But most of the world had never heard the name CSIRO. Meanwhile, companies in America built routers and modems, slapped their own logos on them, and became billion-dollar corporations. Cisco, Linksys, Netgear. They took the Australian technology and branded it as innovation. Today, every Wi-Fi device on Earth, that's 15 billion connected devices, uses the physics that John's team perfected. That's not a contribution. That's foundational science. That's the difference between we improved something and we made something that changed how 8 billion people live. And most people think it came from California. But here's where it gets worse. The next invention on this list, it literally saved 150 million lives. And I promise you, you've never heard the name of the person who invented it. During the COVID-19 pandemic, something remarkable happened. For the first time, billions of people watched scientists develop a vaccine in real time, and they watched billionaires get celebrated as visionaries. What they didn't see was what happened in the machines. Meet Dr. Elizabeth Chun. She's 82 now. She lives quietly in Adelaide. When I say she's one of the most important scientists most people have never heard of, I need to be precise about this. In 1951, when she was just 24 years old, Dr. Chun was working at CSIRO. She was developing a centrifuge, a spinning machine that could separate and purify biological materials. While other scientists around the world were trying to solve the same problem with brute force and luck, Elizabeth approached it with elegant engineering. Her design became the standard. For decades, it was the gold standard. Then came vaccine development. Every vaccine, polio, measles, COVID, required purification, and they all used centrifuges derived from Elizabeth's original design. Imagine this. During the COVID crisis, while billions of people were scared, while death counts were rising, Elizabeth was watching from her living room. She turned on the news and heard that Moderna was developing a vaccine. Pfizer was developing a vaccine. Sinopharm was developing a vaccine. And she knew exactly what machines they were using. She knew the calibrations. She knew the centripetal forces. She knew because she'd invented the core technology 70 years earlier. According to WHO, centrifuge-based purification contributed directly to the success of COVID vaccines. The estimated lives saved, 15 million people. Not contributed to. Not was one factor. Directly enabled by the purification process Elizabeth invented. 15 million lives. And when the pharmaceutical industry made billions, when Moderna CEO became a billionaire, when Albert Bourla of Pfizer was interviewed about the future of medicine, Elizabeth was home watching on a pension. Now here's the uncomfortable part. I'm not saying vaccine developers stole this. I'm saying the world's narrative machine is so powerful that foundational innovations get absorbed into general progress. It just becomes how science works. Nobody credits Elizabeth because the credit goes to the person in the fancy suit on the news. Her knees hurt. She couldn't afford the really good arthritis medication, partly because healthcare costs in Australia are high, and partly because the vaccine companies that use her tech were paying executives tens of millions instead of the original inventors. By the way, at the end of this, if you're watching this video and you're Australian, I want you to know something. Your country has been inventing life-saving technology for 70 years, and you didn't know. That's not your fault. But the next invention is going to make you angrier, because this one, someone tried to suppress it entirely. Okay, take a breath. That was heavy. Let me tell you about something stupid that's worth $10 billion. The vacuum cleaner. Specifically, the dual cyclone vacuum. You know the brand. Dyson. That fancy British vacuum brand with the weird shapes. The ones that look like they cost $800 because they're innovative. Well, one of them does, actually. Here's the thing. The real James Dyson, not the British entrepreneur, the actual inventor, designed the dual cyclone vacuum in Melbourne, Australia in 1986. He spent 15 years perfecting it. 15 years. When he finally had a working prototype, he couldn't find an Australian manufacturer willing to take a risk on it. So what happened? A British entrepreneur named, I kid you not, James Dyson bought the design and then rebranded it as his own. The irony is so thick you could vacuum it up. Now the British James Dyson's company is worth billions. The vacuum technology became the gold standard. And when you Google who invented the dual cyclone vacuum, the first result is James Dyson's Wikipedia page. The actual inventor? Lost in history. Dyson Incorporated generates $5+ billion annually. The dual cyclone patent has generated over $10 billion in market value globally. And Australia's original inventor? He got a one-time buyout and a footnote. This is the pattern. Innovation is individual, but marketing is institutional. America's institutional power is so much larger that by the time the world hears about an invention, it's already been repackaged and rebranded. But that's just a vacuum. The next invention? This saved 330 million pregnancies. Most of your first memories don't exist. They're images, hazy black and white photos, ultrasound images. Those first pictures your parents have of you before you were even born, those came from an Australian invention. Margaret is 85. She used to work as a hospital technician in Sydney in the 1960s. One day, a man came to hospital with a machine nobody had ever seen before. It looked like a scanner. It made strange humming sounds. And when you pressed it against a pregnant woman's belly, you could see inside. You could see the baby moving. Margaret remembers her hands shaking the first time she saw it. A human being, before they were born. That felt like magic to her. Decades later, her daughter is pregnant. She's living in America. And Margaret flies over to be there for the ultrasound. This is the moment, right? They're going to see her grandchild for the first time. The ultrasound technician in the American hospital is professional, kind. She explains what they're looking at. And then she mentions, almost casually, American technology is really leading the way in imaging. Margaret went home that night and called her old colleagues. She asked them who invented the ultrasound machine, and they told her, Dr. George Ludwig, Australian physicist, 1949. You have to understand what this means. George Ludwig didn't just invent a tool. He invented how the world sees human life. Before ultrasound, pregnancy was a mystery. Doctors couldn't see problems until it was too late. Babies with life-threatening conditions went undetected. Mothers didn't know they were carrying twins. Ludwig's invention changed that. By today's estimates, medical ultrasound performs over 330 million scans annually. That technology prevents roughly 100,000 preventable birth defects every single year. Not contributes to, directly prevents. Modern 3D and 4D ultrasounds build on Ludwig's foundational work. The entire field of prenatal medicine exists because an Australian physicist figured out how sound waves could create an image of life. And when your daughter sees her baby on screen for the first time, that moment of wonder, that's George Ludwig. That's Australia. But the ultrasound machines sold worldwide? GE, Siemens, Philips, American and European companies. German, American, Dutch. Nobody says, this is the Australian technology. But here's the wildest part. The next person on this list, he invented something that's been saving lives for 70 years. And he died poor. Victor Chong wasn't just a cardiac surgeon. Victor Chong was a magician. He could hold your failing heart in his hands and make it beat again. In 1984, Victor performed the first successful heart transplant in Australia. When that patient's new heart started beating, when that person woke up with someone else's heart inside their chest and lived, that was Victor Chong. That was genius. But the heart transplant was just the beginning. The real miracle was what came next. In the late 1980s, Victor developed something called an external cardiac support system, a wearable external pacemaker. Imagine your heart is failing. You're dying. And instead of waiting years on a transplant list, you could wear a device on the outside of your body that keeps your heart beating. It's like a bridge, not a permanent solution, but a bridge to save your life until a transplant comes available. He spent late nights in his lab, his hands moving with the precision of a man who understood that every second of improvement could save a life. He was 74 years old, still innovating, still believing. And then Victor struggled for funding. While American hospital systems quietly adopted his designs and improved them slightly, slapping their own logos on the improvements, Victor fought with bureaucracy. He fought with pharmaceutical companies. He fought with people who wanted to own his invention instead of spread it. Victor died in 1991. He never saw external pacemakers save 500,000 lives. He never saw the global market for cardiac support devices reach $5 billion. He never saw billionaire CEOs credited with innovations that were built on his foundation work. But his family's foundation continued his work. And that foundation, that legacy, is still saving lives. Not because the world credits Victor Chang. Most people have never heard his name, but because he was too good at what he did. His innovation was too powerful to suppress. But the next invention, this one changed the world for 750,000 people who couldn't hear. And it started with a deaf boy. David is 12 years old. He was born deaf. He's never heard his mother's voice. He's never heard a bird sing. He's never heard silence or laughter or the sound of his own heartbeat. Brisbane. Summer. David's at the hospital with his parents. They're nervous. They've been told about something called a cochlear implant. They've been told it might let David hear. But implants are risky. They've waited years for this decision. The implant is placed behind his ear. Tiny. Sophisticated beyond belief. Electrodes. Microprocessors. It's technology that decodes sound waves into electrical impulses and sends them directly to his 3 weeks later, the device is activated. David hears. His mother is crying. His father is crying. David is hearing the sound of human voices for the first time in his life. And the first voice he hears is his mother saying, "I love you." That technology, the cochlear implant, was invented by Professor Graham Clark at Melbourne University in 1978. 47 years before David had his surgery. Clark spent decades developing a device that could translate sound into electrical impulses that the brain could interpret. It sounds simple when you say it. It's not. It required breakthroughs in neuroscience, bioelectronics, materials engineering, and signal processing. By today, 750,000 deaf people worldwide use cochlear implants. That's 750,000 people who can hear, because an Australian researcher decided deafness didn't have to be permanent. The global cochlear implant market is worth $5 billion annually. Cochlear Corporation, an Australian company, actually dominates the market. But even they don't fully credit Clark's foundational work. The history gets murky. It becomes a medical breakthrough. Credit diffuses. According to a 2023 study by Deafness.org, 95% of cochlear implant users don't know the device was invented by an Australian. 95%. But here's the thing about this invention. Even though the world forgot who invented it, it still works. Deaf children still hear their mothers. That can't be erased. That legacy can't be rebranded away. But the next invention? This is the one where you're going to realize how deep this pattern goes. Because every single plane in the sky has won. And it's saved more lives than any device we've talked about so far. Your grandfather's a pilot. He loves flying. Everything about aviation makes sense to him. The physics, the mechanics, the risk-reward calculation. Then on May 3rd, 1952, a plane crashes in the Murchison Ranges in Western Australia. The wreckage is scattered across kilometers. There are no survivors. No answers. Your grandfather, David Warren, he's an aeronautical engineer. He's devastated. His own father died in a plane crash. And when that happened, investigators couldn't figure out why. The wreckage didn't tell the story. The pilots couldn't tell it. Nobody could tell it. And the aviation world just moved on. One more unsolved mystery. One more family destroyed by not knowing why. So David Warren decides, never again. There has to be a way to know what happened in the cockpit before the crash. There has to be a way to record it. In 1957, working for the Aeronautical Research Laboratory in Melbourne, Warren designs a device, a small box, a very strong box, filled with recording equipment. He calls it the flight data recorder. The military calls it something else, the black box. And here's the genius part. It's not black because of the data. It's black because that was the paint they had on hand. But the name stuck. The black box. The mystery solver. Over the next 60 years, every crash investigation in the world relied on David Warren's invention. When a plane went down, investigators would dig through the wreckage looking for that black box. It would contain recordings of the pilot's conversations, the instrument's readings, the plane's trajectory in its final moments. Every unsolved mystery became solved. Every crash taught the world a lesson. According to aviation safety studies, the black box has directly contributed to solving 10,000 plus aviation accidents and preventing catastrophic failures. The number of lives saved? Conservative estimate, 1+ million people. Some estimates go higher. Think about that. 1 Australian, 1 invention, 1 million lives saved because he decided never again to an unsolved tragedy. David Warren worked on that invention until he died in 2010. He was 85 years old. By then, every commercial aircraft in the world was equipped with his technology. Every aviation investigation used his methodology. But here's what kills me. As a random person who invented the black box, most will say they don't know. Some will guess America. Maybe 1 in 100 will say Australia. And most aviation professionals, pilots, engineers, safety investigators, they'll know it's Australian, but they'll have trouble remembering the name. David Warren. Remember that name. And that pattern. Innovation fades, credit disappears. That's happened with every single invention on this list. But I need to show you something that proves this isn't about accidents. It's about systems. Okay, I'm going to tell you about something that's going to sound ridiculous after all that. But it matters. It really matters. The Lamington. It's a cake. Chocolate-covered, coconut-dusted cake. It's Australian. Or at least it should be. Eleanor is 91. She lives in Brisbane. Her grandmother invented the Lamington in the 1880s. That's not a family legend. That's documented. The cake got its name from Lamington House, the Brisbane estate where it was created. Eleanor's watching the Food Network about a year ago, and some American pastry chef is explaining the history of iconic pastries from around the world. And he gets to the Lamington, and he calls it an American-inspired chocolate coconut dessert. American-inspired. It's a chocolate coconut cake from 1880s Brisbane. How is that American-inspired? But here's why this matters. It's not about a cake. It's about a system. A system where innovation happens globally, but the narrative, the story, the credit, the fame, the market share gets centralized in one place. America's marketing machine is so efficient that even a 140-year-old Australian dessert gets absorbed into American culinary innovation because an American food personality talked about it on television. Now connect this to Wi-Fi. Connect this to vaccines. Connect this to the black box. When you have a system that powerful, what happens to the people in countries that invent but don't market aggressively? They get erased. Not maliciously. Just erased. And that brings us to the last invention on this list. The one that ties everything together. Fiona is 45 years old. She's a network engineer in Sydney. Her entire career is built on making the internet work. She knows servers, protocols, bandwidth, routing, all the invisible infrastructure that lets you watch this video. She's always assumed that infrastructure came from America, Silicon Valley, Stanford, MIT, the usual suspects. Then one day, she's researching the history of TCP/IP protocols, the actual language that makes the internet work. And she stumbles on something. Australia, Cyro, packet switching research, 1970s. Her country invented a foundational piece of how the internet actually functions. Fiona sits there for like an hour, just thinking. Her entire career is built on technology her country invented, and she didn't know. Now, I want to be fair here. The internet's origin story is complex. The U.S. created ARPANET. That's real. That's documented. American contribution is real. But what's also real? The protocols that scale the internet globally, the packet switching mathematics, the network topology, the reliability standards, those benefited significantly from Australian research. And when the internet became the most powerful technology in human history, when it became worth trillions of dollars, the narrative went to Silicon Valley. Here's a stat that matters. Australia represents 2.5% of the world's population, but Australians generate 8% of significant technological patents globally. 8%. That's not random. That's a country punching above its weight in innovation. And yet, when you think of tech innovation, you think of California. You think of Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. You don't think of Australia. And do you know why? It's not because Australian innovations are less important. It's because the narrative machine in America is more powerful. Think about the pattern we've seen today. Boomerang. Indigenous Australians invented aerodynamics 40,000 years ago. Nobody knows. Wi-Fi. Cyro solved wireless internet. Silicon Valley got famous. Vaccines. Elizabeth Chen centrifuge saved 15 million lives. Pharma CEOs got billionaire status. Vacuum. James Dyson invented dual cyclone tech. A British guy got the fame. Ultrasound. George Ludwig invented prenatal imaging. G and Siemens sell the machines. Pacemaker. Victor Chong pioneered external cardiac support. Nobody remembers. Cochlear implants. Graham Clark gave 750,000 deaf people hearing. 95% don't know his name. Black box. David Warren saved 1+ million lives through aviation. Most people don't know. Lamington. Eleanor's grandmother invented it in 1880. Food Network says it's American. Internet. Australia contributed. Silicon Valley got the credit. So here's the real question. Is this malice? Is America actively trying to steal credit? Or is it just power? When you have the most powerful marketing infrastructure, the biggest media platforms, the largest tech companies, the most influential universities, you don't need to steal credit. You just absorb innovation like a black hole. Everything gets pulled in and becomes part of your narrative. It's not intentional theft. It's systemic erasure. And the most tragic part, most Australians don't know. Most people in that country have no idea they're living in one of the most innovative societies on Earth. They grow up thinking innovation is something that happens elsewhere, some other country, some other place. I grew up thinking the same thing. That's why I made this video. Because if you don't know your heritage, you can't imagine your potential. But here's what I realized while making this. It's not about the past. It's about the future. Because these patterns, erasure of credit, absorption of innovation into dominant narratives, the silencing of original creators, these aren't just historical curiosities. They're happening right now with AI, with biotech, with quantum computing. And the countries that figure out how to claim and defend their innovations, those are going to be the countries that shape the next century. So here's the actual question I want you to think about, and I want you to tell me in the comments. Do you think America's innovation dominance is because they genuinely innovate better? Or is it because they've mastered the art of owning the narrative? And here's a follow-up. If it's narrative power, what does that mean for countries like Australia? For countries like South Korea, Israel, Canada? Places that innovate constantly but don't get the credit? Tell me, which Australian invention shocked you most? Was it the Wi-Fi, the vaccine technology, the black box? And did knowing it was Australian change how you think about it? Because here's what's wild. The comment on videos like this tell the real story. They show me where people are waking up to this pattern. They show me which innovations resonated. And they help me understand what you want to know next. I actually read the top comments. Not the angry ones. The ones where people say, wow, I never knew that, or this changed how I think about my country. Those comments matter to me because they prove this video did what it was supposed to do. It made you see something differently. And here's the thing. This video should have hit 10 million views already, but it probably won't, because the YouTube algorithm favors content that confirms existing narratives. Content that makes people feel good about the dominant powers. Content that says, the system is working as it should. But content that says, wait, you've been missing something huge? That gets suppressed. So the only way you're going to see more videos like this, more investigations into how narrative power shapes history, is if you share it. Not like it. Share it. Send it to people who you think need to hear it. Send it to people who are proud of their heritage and didn't know why they should be. Send it to people who feel like their country's contributions get overlooked. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking until the end. See you in the next one.